All right, welcome back to another episode of Side Note, the podcast dedicated to underground electronic dance music and all things related. As always, I am your host, Nick, and with me this week is J.Wu, DJ and promoter of Under Los Angeles. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Yeah, of course. I like to kick off every interview with kind of like getting a sense for like what my guest is up to, for this weekend that we're meeting, because I feel like it's always kind of a good slice of, what's happening in the scene. So, you were kind of talking about it before we started rolling, but if you wouldn't mind, because I feel like you're doing a lot of interesting stuff, not only on the promotion side, but on the artist management, and then of course you're like a DJ as well.
Yeah, so today is March 12th, so I'm not sure when this is going to come out, but we are having Juliet Sikora, one of the label heads for Kickball Records, and Freedom B also on her record, and Repopulate Mars and Elro for a warehouse party here in LA. It's going to be pretty exciting. It's both their LA debuts, so it's going to be pretty good. We have a lot of good traction there going on.
Sick. Yeah, Kickball is like a really awesome label. It's been around for a minute. It's definitely been one of my favorites. It's like in the rotation of the labels that I always look at. I feel like their sound kind of started progressive and then got a little more kind of like
housey. I would say, yeah, I would say you're absolutely right. And I think, especially when I first started DJing around 2016, 2017, I was playing a lot of Kickball records, but it wasn't, it was like Moonwalk or Oliver Giacomoto, which, kind of fit their sound, but isn't necessarily what you would think of it with the label now. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And now, like, I feel like sometimes it's like kind of housey, even like maybe indie dance stuff, but still like interesting, like awesome music. And then you were telling me last night, because you manage some artists as well.
Yeah, so Under Los Angeles is what we do as far as a promotion group in LA and also in Puebla, Mexico, and Tulum. But I'll also do agency work with Eminent Artist Agency. So Gio Alatriste, who is my partner, also with Under Los Angeles. The way I met him was he was doing artist management and agency work before that with Avid Artist Agency, and then sometime during COVID, he decided to do his own thing, and he decided to bring me along too. So he and I manage like a handful of artists, including like Savage and She, Freedom B. We're working on a tour for Hector, and then we'll have a few more, which I don't want to announce just yet.
Sure.
We'll also be visiting LA. So Freedom B will be kicking off his LA tour as well with Juliet Sikora. So we have 4 dates with them, and then we're going to follow each other. So tonight in LA, tomorrow in San Diego, and then next weekend in Phoenix and El Paso in Texas.
Fuck, man. That's like quite a busy schedule, like myself, you also have a kind of a full-time job, so this is like a side gig for you. So like, I feel like, how do you balance that in terms of staying rested, staying healthy?
I don't know much about staying rested or staying healthy, but it was a lot harder before, because when you're younger, you think, you're invincible, so you don't actually have boundaries. But as I get older and, it's harder to do things nowadays. So I try to create, time to do other things, maybe rest, like sleep is a really big one. And then of course, go to the gym, because, you're pounding alcohol all the time. So you need to do something else besides.
Yeah.
I gained about 20 pounds during the pandemic because, you're just home drinking, so.
Been there, am I right?
Lost that. But I think it helps that because I have like that type of ADHD where the more stuff I have on my plate, the easier it is for me to do, because that's like chaos that I'm very comfortable with. So the less stuff I have to do, the more anxious I get. So
okay.
Yeah, during the day, I'll be taking meetings, I'll be doing work, but I'll also be sending emails on behalf of the agency or talking to like other promoters or agents for Under a Los Angeles party. So just throughout the day, just like switching gears all the time.
That's definitely kind of a commonality that I've found with all, because of the guests I've interviewed, right? It's a mix of DJs and promoters, and definitely like on the production side, I think all of you guys kind of share that same commonality where, you're all very entrepreneurial, and then, part of what drives that is just kind of I don't know if restlessness is the right word, but you need to have stuff to be doing to keep you engaged.
Yeah, part of it is motivation, and it's just the the desire to do like a good job for the sake of doing a good job. It's
Right.
like same reason why a lot of producers, why they like make music or make art. It's just, most importantly for anyone else, it's, it's something that gives them fulfillment. So same goes for me as well.
So I guess, in terms of what you do, what was the inception of it? And, how did you decide, okay, we're going to do management and we're going to do promotions? And, I guess, what are the different challenges between both aspects of that business?
So I never really thought about getting into doing like the agency work, but my original idea for why I wanted to throw events before I started doing stuff with Under Los Angeles was that we were doing a lot of events for Identity Presents, and one of my driving ethos for that was that at the time there wasn't a lot of progressive house events in LA. We have a lot of tech house and techno, warehouse techno, but there wasn't really a space for that kind of music. The clubs weren't really playing it. And then, clubs like Exchange and flat out said, like there's not a market for it here. So I was pretty determined at the time to be, it didn't have to necessarily be me, but I just wanted to kind of like carve the space, or at least, crack the whip as it were. So that was my goal. Eventually, it kind of just transpired to like, now we started something and now I can't like put it down. So we have to keep the movement or cadence going, or else.
Right. Yeah. You gotta keep the momentum going.
I'm happy to kind of see now, even though, I'm doing work now with Under LA, there's other promoters, and you can see even with like 6 a.m., shout out to 6 a.m. for booking Jeremy Olander and Ken. That was pretty cool. So
yeah.
you're starting to see that, that sound is starting to really take hold. I'm pretty sure there was always a desire for that here in LA. It just wasn't, people just weren't doing anything about it until now.
Yeah, what's interesting is that there was a time when that sound, or like the grandfather of that sound, or whatever, the ancestor of that sound, was the sound in LA. Like, how old are you?
I'm 28, so
okay.
I was about to say, like, at the time, a lot of people who I know who are in the scene, like my mentors, they were around for that generation, but I wasn't, so I never really got to experience that. Like, I think you were saying, like, John Digweed at the Mayan, like, before I was even old enough to go to clubs, but that would have been a really special night.
Yeah, so like for those of us like kind of on the older end of the spectrum, myself included, pushing 40, what up? That was the sound, like, yeah, Digweed at the Mayan, like the whole gamut of like global underground DJs. And when Enzo from Dialogue was on, we were talking about it and how like we all sort of came up in that sound. And, like the DJs that were coming through at the time were like the whole slate of UK progressive house DJs. So like Nick Warren, Dave Seaman, Sasha Digweed, Danny Howells, Lee Burridge at one point was part of that as well before he went Playa Tech. But that was it. So it's funny, like, and then all of like the DJs, I feel like my age, like in LA at least, that I know. So maybe that's getting like more and more specific, but all sort of point to like Sasha and Digweed is kind of the North Star and like that sound. And yeah, it kind of went away. And so what like excites me is that you're kind of a slightly younger generation, still like millennial, right? But kind of reviving it, which is awesome. Like the only other party that I feel like, is pushing a similar sound is like Subtract.
Oh, for sure. They definitely skew more, I would say. I'm not sure if Playa Tech is the right word, but, organic. They book Brian Sid a lot. And, of course, Hernan Catano. So that more, I call it the Argentinian sound.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. And, like, Anton Tomas, like, his shit is definitely progressive. Anytime I hear him play, he's, like, dropping, like, classic progressive tracks from like 10, 15 years ago, like kind of layering them in here and there. And it's always like, for me of that generation, like, yeah. At the same time, like for myself, like I'm very aware of the fact that like I'm sort of crystallizing into a sound that is like near to me when there's all this sort of evolution happening. And I try really hard, like not to be one of those guys. So like I try to appreciate kind of what's going on with like the industrial techno here and like the tech house and like the indie. There's so much, like I've talked about it on the program before, there's so much, so many different scenes going on at once now, like subgenres that I feel like it's easy to kind of fall into your own thing.
Especially in LA, just because everyone is of such a high caliber of music knowledge that they become very opinionated and they kind of like what they like.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting too because you hear all this like online where, oh yeah, it's not progressive house anymore. It's organic house or melodic techno or a lot of what you would call progressive house from maybe even 10, 15 years ago is now considered indie dance. So
Yeah. That's something new that's blown my mind. Like, it's definitely changed. So there was a point where like what I would have considered progressive house, if you go by Beatport, right? It all moved into tech house. And then it moved into like minimal. And then it moved into melodic house and techno. And now it's moving into indie dance. It's crazy how sort of like amorphous the genres are.
And the sound really changes a lot. It changes a lot too because like back in 2016 it was very minimal, but now it's like more sparse drums and it's more about the melodies.
Yeah.
And even if you think about stuff from like classic prog era, 90s, early 2000s, like a lot of that stuff you would consider tech house today by those standards. So it's kind of interesting to see, how the definitions of genres change. I'm pretty sure, like, I think RA kind of covered this, but the originators for tech house, they don't recognize what tech house is now. So
Right, yeah. What is now called tech house, I feel like would just kind of back in the day have been like commercial house.
Yeah, just house.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like it's so like one can go down the rabbit hole of like dissecting genres, at least for myself personally, like forever, infinitely. Yeah. It's like an infinite rabbit hole. But I did want to ask you, so yeah, like as a kind of, relative to me, like younger DJ who's embraced a sound that is sort of in the process of kind of being revived, right? Like how did you even come to your like love of that sound to begin with?
So this is going to be a little embarrassing, but obviously at my age, I came from like the Deadmau5 Tiesto area. When
we all start somewhere. Yeah. There's a gateway drug for everyone, right? Yeah. So for sure.
Yeah. So for me, it was like in 2008 was when I was being exposed to more than just like bubblegum, like EDM or like Alice DJ. It was like when I was getting into like Tiesto's like Elements of Life, and then that's when like Deadmau5 was doing what was called progressive house at the time, but I didn't really go to any events until 2015. So there was a period of time where I was just afraid to like be social. And then once I went out and I just saw how it was, I kind of wanted more. But I think what really was the catalyst for me to want to be more in the industry was Eric Prydz. And I know a lot of people say that, and it's kind of cheesy to say, but I really would say he is a gateway for a lot of people to discover prog, and a lot of people who were growing up with him when he started touring in the U.S. around 2010. Like their sounds evolve too. Either they stay with that kind of sound, or they go to something that's like Afterlife or Intervisions. So it's kind of like that kind of natural progression.
Okay, so yeah, you were introduced through kind of the Deadmau5, Eric Prydz, which is I feel like a common gateway, and then where did it drill down from there? Because like for instance, I had Gia from 6 a.m. on, and he had kind of a similar story about, Sasha and Digweed, like trance, and then Sasha and Digweed, and then he went to Compression Party and saw Marcel Detman, and his brain melted. So did you have like a similar experience like that somewhere along the line?
Kind of, and I think by the time I was going out to parties and then listening to Prydz, I was already jaded just because I was listening to music like that for a long time before I started going out to parties. So maybe it's just the way my brain is wired, but I'm always looking for something a little bit more esoteric or something different. So I just went down a rabbit hole. I went down a rabbit hole pretty hard, and that's when I discovered, more classic era progressive.
Okay.
I started picking up like Global Undergrounds and Reed, and that kind of spiraled from there. And from there I discovered people like Darren Epsilon. So yeah, LA native, who's now in Berlin. So it's kind of interesting as a DJ when you're trying to like search for music, and what my tastes are as a DJ now is definitely different from my tastes as a DJ perhaps like 6 months or even a year ago. Like I'm always trying to, I wouldn't say I get sick of a certain sound, but I'm always looking for something better. And I think as the longer you are in the game, like your tastes change, your ears change. So a lot of the stuff that I used to like before may not necessarily be my cup of tea now, just because I didn't realize that it just just different. So
yeah, like your tastes evolve. So what's really doing it for you these days?
So one of my music mentors, Ryan Hubert, shout out to Hubris. He's on Stereoka, so ethereal techno. So they're also based out in Berlin. So they're some key people on the label that I really like are like, say, Nick Devon or Earthlife. Earthlife is becoming really huge right now, I think, especially because they're doing collabs with like Methane, Jeremy Olander's sound, like more of the darker prog. So for me, it's not necessarily about what's dance music. And people, I know a lot of people call this kind of music like ketamine, ketamine techno, because it's not very dancey per se, but it's more about like introspection. And as someone who is introverted and is very stuck in his own head a lot, I think that music really like grabs me like in a very like emotional and poignant way. So no matter what mood I'm in, like that's just puts you in a state of mind.
I see you, dog, and maybe like it's an Asian thing, but like I definitely like vibe with you in terms of like the natural introversion and the ability for that sound to kind of lock you into this sort of like introspective, like almost spiritual kind of place. At least that's how it's been for me. And yeah, I feel like if you go back to like, I don't know if you've listened to like Digweed's like underground, Global Undergrounds.
Yeah, the one my favorite one, and the one I actually keep in my car is actually the Global Underground LA. So,
yeah, the one from the Mayan Party, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't recorded there.
Right. Yeah. It captured the essence. But yeah, I think that is like a prime example of kind of that like introspective techno. But it's interesting what you said. Like, I don't know that I would necessarily say that it's sort of ketamine music, but
I wouldn't use that descriptor, but I know a lot of people do. A lot of people aren't attracted to that kind of sound just because it's not something people like. More dancey stuff or something that's more high BPM, something that's energetic. But but that kind of music for me evokes a different kind of energy. It's more personal and spiritual, and it's kind of like what the spirit of trance was. But, in a different medium.
Agreed. So like funny story. So I brought my brother and his wife, my sister-in-law, who were on the show last, to a party in the desert that I DJ'd at, and I went like full kind of like psychedelic progressive, and I remember like they weren't feeling it. Like they were just like, wait, could we get some Diplo? And like nothing but love to Mark and Jazz, but maybe I'm the weird one, right? Because like I'm playing like really weird music, but I thought it was just interesting that, to your point, it doesn't vibe with everyone. But for me, I'm like, why wouldn't you vibe with this? Like,
it's specifically meant to vibe.
Yeah. Like for me, like it's perplexing that some people don't like it, but
to each their own. I feel like music taste is ultimately super subjective. There's not a lot of objectivity, so
100%, right? And it'll boggle my mind, like some of the stuff that other people like, and so it's a two-way street.
I will say, like, it's kind of surprising because sometimes you wouldn't think that would work, because a lot of times I'm still like very afraid of who I am authentically as an artist, just because I'm not sure if it'll work in LA or if people, because it's so predominantly a commercial or tech house kind of crowd, like will they really like vibe to it in the same way I do? And sometimes they do. I played a desert party with Coalesce over New Year's, and I was taking over from someone who was playing like 150 BPM like techno, like the hardest shit. There's no way I could like segue from that to what I normally play, but I was playing 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. So I kind of just reset the vibe and says, I'm not sure who's gonna be out here at this time, but I'll just play whatever I want. And it was just really, really vibey, like heady shit. And then surprisingly, people were really like into it. And, like I woke up the next morning, I went to the campgrounds, and people were like, I really enjoyed your set. Like it was like the perfect vibe. So like, I think you have to give people more credit for their musical tastes.
Yeah, that's true. Which I need to do more. Like I feel like as a kind of chin stroking techno snob, it's really easy for me to kind of like. But speaking of Coalesce, like I feel like a handful of the guests who've been on here also played. That was a New Year's thing, right?
Yeah, they typically do a New Year's thing.
Who's behind that?
Forrest Bump, Jay Gill, Prismus, and a few others.
Okay.
Yeah, so I actually met them through a buddy of mine, Aaron Cappy. I think there was a show at the Exchange at the Gallery, and then one of my old DJ partners was DJing that night, and that's when I met most of them. And then from there, they're like, hey, during the first year of COVID 2020, it's like, do you guys want to do like an Identity Presents takeover? So that was the year they didn't do a desert party, so we just did like a 72-hour live stream. So,
Okay.
And then the year after, was it 2020? Yeah, it was 2021. So it was like, hey, do you want to actually we're gonna do this again? Would you like to come out and play?
Right.
Like, for sure.
Awesome. I might have to ask you to connect me with them after this.
Really dope guys. Shout out to Coalesce New
Yeah,
Year's.
shout out. I think the homie Dark Portals. Do you know him?
His name sounds familiar. I think.
Okay, he was on the lineup. I think maybe he had to drop out last minute. 'Cause I think maybe he caught COVID or something. But yeah, like him, you, and a few others that I know, or like many others, because that was a really big lineup, if I remember correctly. Where was it?
Somewhere in like Apple Valley, like
Okay,
Mojave Desert.
So like kind of on the way to Vegas ish.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
LA native my entire life, and I can barely tell you how to get to Vegas.
Well, we're throwing a thing, a desert party on April, so you should come
For sure.
It'll be like camping vibes. I mean, you know the deal.
Yeah.
So other question, I had for you is like, so now you are a producer of parties, but as a consumer, are there any other groups out there that you particularly vibe with, or that you're like, oh, this is kind of a model that I want to emulate?
Definitely a lot of people from 6 a.m. I would say 6 a.m. is kind of like the blueprint for how I wanted to kind of architect my career as a promoter.
Shout out to Gia.
Nice.
And Marco.
It's kind of, there are a few others like Incognito, Dirty Epic, of course, all the big techno promoters. And I think I've always had a very weird relationship with the music scene because maybe you'll understand this as well. There's not a lot of Asians in house and techno in general, right? But you think about who's throwing all the big parties in LA. It's like they're all run by Asians.
Yeah.
I think that's particularly inspiring, especially since a lot of when I'm in certain Facebook groups like Asian Creative Network or Asian, like all the music ones, there's no one else doing house techno. It's mostly just pop or dubstep, future bass, whatever you would consider Porter Robinson. So it was hard for me to kind of find a home because there was always that disconnect. So really happy to see how they're doing things and growing. There are a few others too, but I've been so busy I haven't been able to go to like a lot of other parties, so I can't think of any particularly that come in mind.
Right.
But yeah, it's just been a pretty big whirlwind.
Yeah, like in terms of like sort of the diversity and inclusion aspect, for myself personally, yeah, it's certainly encouraging to kind of see like all that representation taking place behind the scenes. Like I definitely feel like it could be more on the talent end. I think generally, like across entertainment, like we're still sort of trying to find our place, right? Like you look at like Hollywood and films.
Shout out to Simu Liu for helping break.
Yeah, shout out to Simu. Like even in we were talking about before, even in like the Batman, the one fucking Asian guy in the movie is like the meek guy on the train who's about to get his ass beat by like the gang, and then Batman saves him, and the first thing he says to Batman is like, "Please don't hurt me." I was like, fuck this.
It's really interesting that you say that because I actually read that scene very differently, and I actually thought that it included that because it was very timely with all the attacks on like Asians.
Stop Asian hate.
Yeah, so I thought that was a neat kind of inclusion. It can kind of be like relative or like poignant, but I can see what you mean, and you see like a lot of actors talk about this a lot, where like they don't want to take certain roles because they feel like it kind of like dehumanizes or kind of like, I'm not sure if like demasculinate or
like emasculates. Yeah. Like shout out to, I mean, this is non-dance music, but I watch listen to a lot of Tiger Belly podcasts. You know that one with Bobby Lee?
Oh yeah.
He's older, right? I think he's like in his 50s. So like he came up in a period in Hollywood that was like even more difficult. And so like he'll talk at length about some of the shit that he's gone through, like as an actor, like on auditions and stuff. Where they'll be like, can you like put an even more Fabi accent on that?
I think they actually spoofed that on like Mad TV back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, it's interesting that you said that because it wasn't even that long ago. Like even like up until maybe a couple years ago, or even still ongoing now, people will still ask, can you put on an accent? The big thing for a lot of Asian American actors is where do I draw the line? What's like okay? What is okay for me as my ethos as an actor versus, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
and-
Yeah, because you don't want it to be like, you know, like the Asian minstrel, right? Like you're just sort of playing up like your otherness for like a laugh or whatever from, you know, a mainstream audience. Anyway, like, you know, we're not here to like dissect identity politics, but, you know, it is, to your point, it is very interesting that behind the scenes, you know, like it's definitely like a lot of, I mean, it's kind of like, I guess kind of like Hollywood, right? Like in terms of, you know how like Jewish people have not traditionally been at the forefront of like being in films and stuff, but they have sort of carved themselves like kind of a niche kind of, and I don't think this is like a negative thing at all, but you know, like they've kind of on the business side of Hollywood, you know, they're like very involved.
They created a space for
they
themselves.
created a space for themselves. And I can kind of see parallels to that with, you know, when I look around and look at like 6 a.m. and Incognito and the like. But yeah, interesting to see the sea change too, because this wasn't, when I was coming up in the scene, you know, it's not who the promoters were either. So it's funny how things change. I guess, you know, to take another direction, you know, when did you pick up DJing? Because, you know, you've kind of talked about your journey with the music, but where did your sort of DJ journey begin?
So I really was pretty adamant, like, I'm not going to become a DJ. I'm not going to do this even for as a hobby. I didn't want to like make this a thing because I knew I have a very obsessive personality. I wouldn't say addictive, but like obsessive. So I knew that if I was going to do something, I was going to, you know, go to it like 100 miles per hour, like balls to the wall. So, but again, I think 2016, 2017, there were a lot of really good shows here in LA. I think Jeremy Olander did a residence, like a three residency dates in LA at Sound. And then I saw like the Lilo shows with Eric Prydz also at Sound, and, you know, like being able to play an extended set. And I think right after one of those shows, I went home. I was so like moved by like, not just the way that they were playing, but also the way that the crowd was reacting and the camaraderie. I think I like downloaded Logic Pro that night, started like fucking around at like 3 a.m. And then I think the next day, like I bought a bunch of, from a homie, I bought like his old J1000s with, you know, the ones that actually had to fucking take CDs. So So I bought that, and I bought like a stack of blank CDs and started burning a bunch of like tracks.
Burning?
Yes.
Wow.
I still have that. So I didn't have, you know, a lot of people start with like controllers. I never did that. So had to freaking learn to beat match by ear and like use janky CDJ jog wheels that weren't always working because they were like 20 years old. And
right.
Yeah. Having to like label every single CD. I'm glad we're past that. It wasn't.
Yeah, like we are and we aren't though, right? Like I feel like, you know, there's a stigma around the sync button.
Yeah, yes and no. I would say, you know, I think as a purist, not a purist in the sense like I want to really learn everything about the craft, and it's the same reason why, you know, I'll make everything from scratch, or like I'll learn everything end to end. You just want to like know everything, so it's good to have that skill. I wouldn't say it's the end all be all, and I think you know, in 2022 to really kind of like die on that hill is like there are more important things.
Yeah.
I will say, however, that there are a lot of people who are doing things with sync, obviously like Richie Houghton. If you're like juggling 4 tracks at the same time, whatever you can do to like free up time or like optimize your time, more power to you.
Yeah.
That being said, also I've seen a lot of people that I really look up to, like when I'm like, what do they call it? Train spotting them behind like the booth, like they're using sync, and I would never think that, you know, someone who's like renowned specifically for being a DJ uses sync, but you know.
Oh, you've seen that from like bigger names? Okay.
Is it okay if I name names? Is it?
Yeah, and if they have a problem with it, they're welcome to come on.
Yes. Like Hernan Catano.
Okay.
At Avalon, so I was like behind him watching him like work, and it was like pretty interesting because the way like he'll go through tracks, and I think, you know, especially when you receive thousands and thousands of promos a day, like you're gonna like get the gist of it, but you don't have the time to really memorize it the way like when like you're a vinyl DJ where you actually like you can tell, like if I asked you like how long the intro is for this song, they can tell you exactly like 32 bars or like 48 bars or like something like that. But you know, he'll skip through the track and he'll play it, and he'll do interesting things that I would never even still be able to do with like blending tracks. But you know, if it saves him time and it works out for him. It works out for him.
Yeah, I mean, I ain't mad at Hernan for that at all. Like the technology exists, like use it. Like I feel like when I'm DJing out, I don't want to use it because I don't want to be seen using it. But when I'm at home, like it's all day sync.
If you're shit faced at 4 a.m., I'm not gonna. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah, and some parties like the desert party when like I am shit faced at 4 a.m. playing, like sync. But I still feel like there's this weird stigma around it, and like DJs, we're like a hateful group, and we like to talk shit.
We're really prideful. It's the same way we use like software synthesizers. Like
we're not hateful, but we are haters.
We're very elitist.
I think there is a distinction there. But like you follow like the worst techno memes or something, or like. The memes like everyone's a DJ till you put one of these in front of them, or it's like a
tape recorder,
CDJ, or vinyl,
or tape reels,
which is like, So I do feel like in 2022, like let's use the technology, and I feel like there's certain scenarios where the logic is not applied evenly. Like so, it's okay to use CDJs in HID mode with Tractor, which is essentially
just
using sync.
Yeah.
But like to use sync directly on a Pioneer CDJ is like, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, so it's very easy, I think, to get just lost in all of like the bullshit and the craft and like all the elitism. But at the end of the day, I think with anything in life, you just got to do what's right by you.
Yeah,
whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
And shout out to Dubfire, but he uses like a Tractor setup with the Model 1 or whatever, and essentially that's sync. And people are like, oh well, it's because he's juggling 5 tracks at a time. But if you're like really looking, like in most cases, they're still just
not all the time,
mixing like track to track. No, I mean you're right. Like I feel like Richie Houghton definitely like juggles, but.
Even if he doesn't, as long as the crowd is having a good time.
Yeah.
However you choose whatever tools you need to do your best job, then whatever works for you.
Totally. So I guess to that, are you just kind of a regular CDJ guy in terms of your home setup then, or do you fuck around with other stuff like drum machines or anything like that?
I've seen some people, shout out to Rami Mishkiri for using a drum machine in his set, so that was something that I wanted to kind of do, or like do like a live or hybrid setup. So at home, I just use 2 CDJs, and I'm hoping to buy a third because when I do play out, like I got 2 tracks playing, usually one loop, and I'm like queuing up the EQing track on the third one. So at least 3 would always be nice. There was a time before I was always DJing progressive when I was doing more like minimal tech or lo-fi, deep house, whatever you want to call that kind of like Slav house sound. I was buying like a shit ton of records, like a lot of records, and that's because at the time, those tracks were only available as vinyl only, right? That culture is still alive in those musical genres, not so much in progressive or melodic. If there is a track released on vinyl, it's not vinyl only, and it's a reprint or something.
Right.
So I did try at one time to, I still have my 2 Technics at home, and there was a time where I was we're gonna play like classic 90s, like progressive sets, like 3-minute long blends, but that never happened. At the end of the day, you only have so much time, and for me, DJing, producing, promoting, agency work, I have to just figure out what's the most important for me. So for me, I'd rather produce more tracks than do that, but I think at some point, we would want to do like a totally live setup where instead of just playing with like CDJs, I'll just bring all of my synths or Ableton and maybe a couple of them and just do something like how Rodriguez Jr. does it. Or
that shit's so interesting. I have like no idea kind of how to even approach something like that.
Totally different.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like you can't really think of it as a DJ at all. So.
Yeah, it's a live PA, right?
Yeah.
Like it's now like you're a musician.
Yeah.
I want to see, shout out to our friend Colin Rodriguez, who's on the show, but he has like kind of a hybrid setup thing that he's been working on. I haven't seen him play it yet, but I'm like so looking forward. So yeah, get it together, Colin. We want to see the hybrid setup. Yeah, and I guess so. What's kind of on the agenda for you in the next couple like weeks and months for unders, and kind of where do you hope to see it go, in the next year or so?
So I think there are a couple stages of a promotion company or event organizer's life cycle, as it were. When you first start out, you may book really great talent, but no one shows up because no one knows who you are yet. And then the second part of that is, you're starting to build a crowd, and you're starting to have regulars who will always go to your party no matter who's playing because they know it's a good party. And, for a lot of other groups like 6am or Incognito, they have those built-in crowds just because they put in that kind of like work to build that. So
interesting. So what you're saying is that it's as much the promoter's brand as it is the talent that's on the flyer that brings in the crowds.
I think so, because I think
so. You couldn't just be like, I've got Diplo, and
I'm kind of glad you mentioned this. So you would think that if you just put a really good name, people will just show up.
Yeah.
That's not true, because, what if there's a conflict, someone else is playing and people just want to go to that show instead? So you're kind of fighting for like a piece of the pie. Or sometimes, you can do your best job as a promoter, but for some reason people just don't know about the show because, maybe you're not on their radar or something. Same thing kind of happened with us with Freedom B playing tonight, where just a lot of people who are typically in our reach, like they didn't know he was playing just because we don't know who they are. They don't know who we are. But, he was like, hey, I'm playing LA tonight. And, we got like a flux of like ticket sales from people who are like fans of him. So that's always been the challenge, especially for LA. You see other scenes like in Arizona where it doesn't matter if it's like an Anjuna Deep party, or a drum code party. That same crowd is going just because those are your only options. You don't have the luxury of choice here in LA. And sometimes people like have too many choices. And like, I've definitely decided one day, like, there are 3 really good parties I really want to go to. I can't choose which one to go. I'm just going to stay home. Or the alternative was like one year I went to see Jeremy Olander and then at Sound, and then like went over to Hernan Catania back-to-back Nick Warren at Avalon like the same night.
Oh shit.
Yeah, that was a really good night. But you can't do that all the time.
Yeah.
So luckily for us at Under Los Angeles, I think we're at the point where we're starting to have a built-in crowd. I think we've thrown a lot of really good events, and people are kind of buying into the brand slowly but surely. We're still really young, right? We haven't even been doing events for a year yet, but good traction there. And it's really about consistency. You're going to have really good parties. You're going to have really bad parties. You're going to have parties where everything on paper looks perfect, right? You have a great headliner. You have great talent. Everyone seems interested in going, and the party busts for whatever reason. Or sometimes things that you don't think would ever work, they just, for some magic reason, they just work. So you can't really think about things in terms of an individual party. You just want to think about things from like, holistically,
right.
How does everything work out?
I guess all in, how many events do you think you've thrown up to this point now?
We've been throwing at least 1 show per month since July. So however many that is, like 9.
Okay.
We're targeting for 1 warehouse party a month, and we have our roster or schedule booked through Q3, so until like fall.
Nice.
And then we'll see what happens in the summer. I think we want to do pool parties again, because we were doing pool parties, day parties at the W Hotel.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah. So we had some pretty big guests. We had Rafa Barrios. We had Michael Hooker, who's on Desert Hearts Black. We had Hector Cotto. So a lot of Spanish tech house guys. It's also been kind of interesting because Gio and myself, we bonded over a progressive house sound, but there's also a tech house, tribal tech, playa tech, Tulum, whatever you want to call that kind of sound thing that also works here, and we kind of also want to kind of capture because it's also authentically either Gio or myself, so kind of planning things out. But next couple headliners will definitely be on the more progressive end of things and more LA debuts. So we're just trying to create something special and meaningful. Even at the end of the day, I'm doing this because like this is my way of contributing to the scene. So whatever I can do to help, then.
Agreed. I mean, yeah, I definitely vibe you. That's what this is. And yeah, I also, timing wise, kind of interesting that you started last July and this started last July. And, a lot of the guests that I've had on kind of got their thing going during COVID, which I've talked about, on this show before. So, as shitty as the last 2 years have been kind of on the global stage, I think, it promoted a lot of growth for people.
Definitely, or at least things changed.
Yeah.
I really wasn't even sure if I was going to do events again post-COVID, because right before, we had like Dave Seaman, we had Miyagi, we had Sid Inc., we had like a really good thing going, and then COVID happened. Won't get too political, but whatever your take on plague raves, COVID raves are, like, that kind of changed the way things are. New people came in who are fresh and eager, and
Yeah.
I don't remember who said this. I think it was Hans Bieger, not to me, but to my buddy Ryan, where when they were talking about this, Hans was saying this is the biggest growth for change, because all these new fresh faces, they're going to play just a particular sound. This is your chance as an artist to kind of innovate and create a new sound, and everyone else will be left behind because that's all they know. All they know is what is there, and then the pioneers and the people who are really working towards something, they'll be the ones who come out ahead in the next 5 years. So
Right. Yeah, there's so many, the people who threw the parties and then the talent who came forward during this time. And yeah, in terms of the plague rave, like, I think I was like mad then while it was happening, but 2 years in, like, in retrospect, like, no biggie. Also, like, I've had guests on the show who were actively involved in throwing those parties, and they talk about how, and yeah, it was a time when people were like really fucked up mentally, scared, uncertain, stuck at home. And yeah, like, how do you get mad at, was it a little responsible? Probably. But the fact is, like, people who went to that really got a release that I'm sure they all needed. For
sure. I think this is true for anything in life. You can kind of try to nitpick or judge people for a particular like silo incident, but what's really like eating them at the end of the day. Like, again, not to get political, but same thing, reason why you fight with people over their certain political beliefs. Like, what's really eating them? Like, are they really like an asshole, or is there something else that really is driving them fear or uncertainty?
Yeah.
And like, I totally get it. Like, I think I came out of COVID pretty well as an introvert. Like, no harm, no foul. But a lot of my friends who were more extroverted, they were really hurting a lot more, beyond just, what is your economic situation going to look like in the next couple of years? But how are you doing as a person?
Just from isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get it, at the end of the day. So it is what it is.
Yeah. But yeah, I think from the ashes, we're already seeing it, right? Like one of the most like robust rave scenes I've ever seen in my life.
We came back pretty hard, I would have to say, almost to the point where I think people started to get a little tired from, there's just so many things happening. I think
too much. Yeah. Too much. I think so. For the month of February, like, I went to something every weekend, which for me, like, is like excessive. Like, that's definitely not normal. Like, usually it's like once or twice a month. And it was just like, oh man, it's gotten like too crazy in terms of like the level of talent that's coming in, or the local talent that we have, on a week to week basis, that, you just want to go out and you want to see these people play, you want to see them perform. And yeah, so it's been tough. And, I went to Dialogue last night. I'm going to see if I can make it to your thing tonight. It's just like a lot going.
Yeah. I think it's also hard, especially because it's different as a fan, as an audience, as a consumer, right? Like, you have choices to go, but now that I don't know if I would call myself in the industry trademark, but
I think you are. I think, I would say you are. You've thrown many parties. You've brought in headliners. Like, what else is there?
I don't know. It's weird to put a head on it, or like a fancy label, but yeah. I think, it's very different once you start to kind of participate in the scene, because, you're going out nights to work. It's not the same as if, I'm going to go out to like have fun because, I enjoy the music, and, I still do enjoy the music, but, my relationship with the industry has changed.
Yeah. So actually that raises a good point. So as it becomes a hybrid of work and play, like, how does that impact your enjoyment of the scene?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, because I think, especially when I was wanting to become a DJ, I had a lot of people I looked up to here in LA, or just like all over. And I would say it's easy to say that, the scene is toxic, the industry is toxic, so I don't want to be a part of this. But are just as many good people that I met through the scene and in the industry as there were bad people, if not more good people. But it was really hard to reconcile that, right? Because, especially, I think for a lot of people who were against the idea of like COVID raves, their thought was, do I want to participate in an industry or a scene where, this is like acceptable? Right. So those are just questions people have. But for me, sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes we'll throw events where I'm not necessarily a fan of the music, but it's still something that I'm going to put on just because it's just what I do. And, people are enjoying themselves, and, I think that's satisfying to me.
Yeah. Like, have you gotten the nod?
Shout out, what movie was that?
Groove.
That's right. Yeah. So
Shout out to Groove. Watch Groove if you haven't seen it.
it's funny you mentioned that, because in my first artist bio, I did mention that, like J.Wu's doing, like, at the end of the day, he's just doing this for the nod. And I think I do get that a lot. People really do enjoy the night out. When we had Hector last month, you can see people were like really, really vibing out. And when we had the SOS Tulum party at W Hollywood back in December, people were really vibing out. And, I'm not very big on tech house, but people were really enjoying themselves. So like, there's satisfaction in knowing I did that. I was a part of this. I slaved for like 24-hour days just to make this happen, and it paid off. So that's good. So I guess at the end of the day, like, it evolved, but I would say in a positive way. Same thing with like when you're listening to music, now that I'm producing, I'm like sound designing and doing all that stuff. I can't turn, like, music just sounds different to me, even if it's not like dance music. It's like, oh, like that, like he's playing this, like this model guitar, he's using like these effects, or like they made this, they sound designed this like lead with like this saw, or like I can't turn that off in my head.
Yeah, anymore. It's like now that you know how the sausage is made, like it's like a different, it's a different experience. Not necessarily bad, right? Yeah. It's just like a different level. I did want to circle back, so you mentioned kind of toxicity in the scene. What kind of stuff have you encountered? Because, for me, and I always say this, like, I'm primarily a consumer, right? So I'm there, I'm just hanging out with my friends. I'm not really like interacting with the promoters and stuff. So I don't know like what people are like, except for like, oh, there's music and there's a crowd. So like, what kind of like, and you would think that in a scene that's sort of built around plur, peace, love, unity, respect, right, that it would all just be rainbows and unicorns. But of course, you get enough people in any situation, there's always going to be like bad apples. So like, what kind of stuff are you encountering?
It's just the people, like, part of it is like, don't meet your heroes. A lot of people who you really like look up to for what their contributions are, or maybe they're not like.
Oh, in terms of like some of the DJ, the talent that you've met and stuff?
Not just DJs, but also like people who also throw events, or just, any part of like the industry. Like, it's different because, can you separate the art from the artist, as it were, right?
Yeah. I mean, I won't, like, obviously you don't want to name names because it's all like pretty close knit, but like what kind of, like, so you meet a promoter that you respect their parties, and they're just dicks? Yeah,
they're just dicks, so they're standoffish. And part of it I understand too. Like, I also get really upset when people, that they come to me for favors, like, hey, can I get a guest list? Or, hey, can I play your shows? Like, I've never met you. Like, I don't get a good read from you. You're not being genuine. Right. So, but for some people, I get it. If they're so inundated with that all the time, then, they're just averse to meeting people in general. Or maybe sometimes they're just dicks, and, this is an ego project, and that's just how they are. But I think accepting that people were not as plur as you would think from your initial exposure to like the rave scene, it's kind of a hard wake up call. But I think that's just something you learn as an adult, and this is true for anything in life. Not everything is rainbows. Not everyone's necessarily here for like the best of reasons. Yeah. Especially when you work in like the service industry or nightlife, where a lot of it is could be based on greed or ego. We've worked with like a lot of like vendors or people where they totally just drop the ball. Like, you had one job, or, you're like this really, really big name or company. Like, how did you fuck up this bad kind of
like
thing?
Fuck up, like a vendor that's supposed to handle your bar or something that drops the ball, or
like venues, or like being shady, or like they had certain jobs or requirements, and then they just don't own up to what they were supposed to do. Or even, I'm the type of person to like ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So like, if I can't get you to do your job and I do your job for you, like, don't get mad at me for having to do your job. I'm just trying to like throw a good part. I'm trying to just do my job, which is, run everything. So, and I would say like a lot of people or a lot of companies, they could buy on their names. So, but that's not really everything. I don't care like how big you are. Like if you can't also do your job or like put up your end of things, like, you know, this is not a very positive transactional agreement, as it were.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. Like anytime nightlife hospitality is involved, it tends to attract shady characters. Like why is that? I guess because it's an industry that revolves around kind of hedonism and
for sure. And some people will always be in it for like good reasons, or some people will just be in it for bad reasons. I would say the same thing it is for like labels or parties. Like I'm not quite at that level yet, but I know that there are some labels or some parties that I would never want to be associated with, even no matter how big they are or how much value they would provide to me, just because I don't agree with like their ethos or with things that go on with them. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people feel the same way. A lot of people shun Insomniac for whatever reason. So it's not really a secret per se, right? It's just, you know, the nature of the beast.
Yeah. Shout out to Pasquale. I mean, say what you will about him, the guy has like accomplished some like insane stuff in terms of like.
For sure, but still people like hate on him for whatever reason. It's like, it is what it is. Either you believe in that or you accept that for what it is, or you don't.
Right. And yeah, like I mean, I can definitely relate to, you know, not meeting your heroes. There's one episode where I talk about how the time I met Sasha, and I was like, not good. I'm talking to you, Sasha.
I actually, so it was right after, which New Year's event was it with Minimal Effort where Sasha was playing? I think it was.
Oh, that was like not too long ago, like 19.
I think it was 19.
17 into 19, I think.
Yeah, I actually was, we just finished
or 18
watching.
into 19.
Yeah, that's right. We just finished watching him play, and then we were looking for like the other rooms, and then I just wandered outside by accident and I saw him. It's like, oh, that's Sasha. And I'm, you know, wearing my Last Night on Earth like sweater and everything. So can I have a picture? And he's like, yeah, what, you know, it wasn't like a negative experience, but I think, you know, at a certain point, especially for if people are dubbing you son of God and other things, like you get tired of meeting people for whatever reasons.
Son of God.
Yeah.
It's the son of God.
But I've been pretty happy and fortunate where most of the people I've met, as far as headliners go, they've been really, really good people. There haven't been a lot of people who I would say like rubbed me the wrong way. So again, like you just got to find quality people, and there are quality people that you really want to align yourself to and kind of like support. Shout out to Colin for being the homie.
Yeah. Shout out to Colin.
Yeah.
There's good people. The DJs, they're not sending us their best, but some of them are good people.
Love it.
You know, I also wanted to touch base. So you mentioned like a Tulum. Does that mean you're throwing stuff in Mexico as well? Like, have you produced in Mexico?
Yeah. So the first show I did with Gio was actually not in LA.
Okay.
He had booked me to play in Puebla in Mexico, so I.
Okay. So before you go any further, tell me how you navigated like the whole cartel of it all.
I'm trying to wonder if I can say this legally because it's actually quite the story.
I mean, you don't have to like name what, like, right? Just in a general sense, like.
Well. It's funny because the first time I did go to Mexico, I've never been there before in my life, to play. So I flew to Mexico City, took a bus down to Puebla, and then, you know, this was the time that they were freeing El Chapo's son, like the next city over.
Okay.
And then, you know, from where I was staying, I was like, oh yeah, there's fireworks outside. And then Gio just turns to me like, no, bro, those aren't fireworks.
Shit, they're like firing gunshots in the air?
I heard just as warnings, right? But, you know, they're still gunshots.
Yeah.
But the party did okay.
Wow.
But the next party we did was also in Puebla. I was opening up for Stelios Vasilodis.
Dude, that's
Shout
legit.
out to Stelios.
Yeah.
Congrats on the new White Cell EP on Balance.
Sick.
That party took kind of a bit of a hit though because of cartel reasons, right? That's just the nature of beasts there sometimes.
So like at some point was somebody, you know, involved in that, like coming to you guys being like, yo, where's my payout?
No, but apparently there was some incident that happened the day before, totally unrelated to us, but it just made people very averse to going out the night of the party. So, you know, we had all these grand plans and everything looked great, but, you know, people still showed up, but nowhere near as what you would think for what.
Right.
Yeah, or what we were slated to be. So people who did buy tickets or buy tables or anything, like some of them just didn't show up, and that's just what it is. But,
yeah, so check out last week's episode with Mark and Jasmine where we dissected our Mexico experience in Playa del Carmen for Departures Festival, where, you know, the cartel presence was definitely felt and known. And then to where we then subsequently like Googled, you know, what was going on. And within like, you know, a month or two of that event, you know, ravers have been getting shot like at raves in Tulum and stuff, where like rival dealers like have shootouts at the rave and people get caught in the crossfire.
that's absolutely a thing. And when Gio met his fiance V was at BPM Festival the year that they did do a shootout over like drugs at BPM. So funny how that's how they had met and bonded, but it's why I think BPM is no longer in Tulum. It's in Costa Rica now, but
right.
And yeah, I know like Tulum is now like the commercial place to be. It's like the new Ibiza, as it were. But I guess there's always that kind of risk, no matter what.
Yeah, like it's funny because like, you know, like I watch all these YouTube videos of like Playa Tech parties in Tulum, like Day Zero and Mayan Warrior and shit. It's like, yeah, like, you know, and that was like part of the impetus for wanting to go party in Mexico for Departures Festival. But I think what was unknown to me, you know, in my naivety was that like, oh, it's actually like kind of sketch. It's pretty sketch.
I would say, I mean, yeah, there's the risk of you at any time in your life is greater than zero for sure. But I would say, you know, you have a similar risk here in LA. Like
that's true.
Living in LA or
that's
like
true.
Going to parties.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, there's always some degree of risk. I think what struck me about Mexico was the degree to which it was clear that the state was not fully in control of the country. Whereas, you know, like here, like, yeah, like you have full confidence that like, it's not the best government, but you have full confidence.
The illusion of like safety or
that,
like,
yeah, but that like the like apparatus of the government is actually running the country here, right. as opposed to like, it was evident in Mexico, like, oh, there's factions, like there's different sort of parties that are vying for territory. That includes like the police versus this, you know, this gang versus that gang. It's like they're all sort of vying for control, and it's not clear who controls what. And like certain areas, it's like, oh yeah, the state runs this. Like this area of Cancun is clearly like under police control, and then over here, it's like, oh no, this area is under the cartel's control. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? Like we live in a strange world. And I lost my train. Oh wait, so V is your partner Gio's fiance. Okay, I met V at Colin's birthday. Shout out again to Colin. So she runs that Berliner Knox, right? Or is that a different V?
Different V.
Oh, okay,
yes.
okay, got it. So not the same.
No,
sorry.
Shout out to V, the brains behind Under Los Angeles.
Okay, got it. And then there's a different V who runs Berliner Not, which is kind of a new thing.
I think so. I've seen some homies on those lineups too, but still need to make my way out.
They're an interesting crew. Like I'm looking forward to getting them on the show as well. Yeah, so many like new crews, new parties, in new music. I'm loving it. You know, and I can't say it enough. It's really exciting to witness, you know, part of like a new golden age in rave. Although, you know, I would say to your earlier point, the plur definitely doesn't feel as strong as it did before. And maybe that's just from some of the parties that I've been to. But for instance, Dialogue last night, great party, fantastic production, tiny all night, you know, fantastic. But I did notice that like the crowd, it didn't feel like a rave. It was like, oh, and like I was there with some friends and we we're kind of like, okay, people are smoking and drinking and there just happens to be like house music here. And that's kind of the vibe. Mm-hmm. It's not sort of, I guess for lack of a better term, it's like, it's less of the kind of like drug plur
experience.
Yeah. Like there was a lot of like, you know, just like kind of aggressive dudes like trying to show off and, you know, like girls in cocktail dresses. To me, that's kind of the indicator of whether or not I'm at a rave is sort of the wardrobe of the girls. So like, if you're at like a commercial experience, the girls are like wearing cocktail dresses, right? If you're at a rave, the girls are wearing like pants and sneakers. And I feel like that's like without fail, like that's how you can kind of tell. And like my friends and I were just like, it's very strange because it has all the hallmarks of a rave. We've got the production, we've got sick sound, sick DJ, but we're not at a rave.
It's definitely changed, and I think you see less and less of that at more niche parties. Like when you go to a techno party, let's say like 3 or 4 years ago, you didn't see any of that stuff, right? It was just a bunch of like heads who are like jaded and have been doing this for a very long time. Perhaps they're not as friendly, or, you know, they're just there for music, not necessarily to like make connections, as it were.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's more fresh faced, you know, my first year after Insomniac, might be like the royal me, you know, they're trying to like chase that kind of dragon. And I do see now, you see people wearing like tutus and like glowing goggles at like, you know, like techno parties now. It's like there's starting to become that kind of blur as like techno becomes more like commercial or mainstream.
Yeah.
But you can say that's better, you know, for it is what it is, for better or for worse. But I would also say that that does bring like in that influx of like a more positive like kind of vibe that maybe we were missing out, just because, you know, when you get to a certain age or a certain like number of years doing this, like you kind of lose sight of what brought you in the first place. So it's kind of like a nice, healthy reminder.
That's true. And like I for one, you know, and I've been talking about it. I've alluded to it a few times, you know, even today. It's like very easy to get like crystallized into what you think or what I think a rave should be, and then to sort of like judge based on that. And actually, I was, you know, I had to like reflect about it on the walk with my dog this morning, and I was like, bro, when was the last party you went to where you actually liked the crowd? Because like every party, I'm like, oh, the crowd sucked. Although, yeah, like I will say, Mayan Warrior for me like stood out recently as a party I went to where, you know, like just unbelievable vibes. But you know, that's not to say that the other parties did not have a good crowd. It was more like, yeah, it was my sort of closeness to change, which I definitely like want to be more aware of, but at the same time, like can fall into like hate.
No, for sure. I think a lot of people will do the same thing, like myself included. It's like, am I just being a snob for the sake of being a snob, or like is it an actual legitimate fear? And most of the times it's just me being like a dick.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
When we had the Hector party last month, we had a lot of people, you know, dressed as if they were from Cross. They had the, you know, house X techno, like sweaters and everything. I'm like, oh, because, you know, I really like Crossed as a party, as a festival. The crowd can be hit or miss, but overall, I would say it's a pretty good experience. So I would say that I was not sure how the crowd was going to be at that party going in, but it really did feel like what I came into raving to do. So it really had that kind of vibe, even if it didn't look that way to me. You know, people were really camaraderie and getting into it.
Yeah, I just want to feel like people are tripping and rolling at the party.
I think it also helps if people trip and roll.
Yeah.
You could also argue perhaps people's choice of drugs makes...
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like drinking and smoking, you don't have to go to rave for that. Do that somewhere else. You can drink and smoke, like have that be part of the mix, but you know, the main course should be tripping and rolling.
Yeah, that should work. I mean, like maybe we'll get to like a certain time in life where, you know, when you enter a rave, would you like a mint at the door?
Yeah. Because it's what holds it together, right? There's no other scene that I can think of where I think, you know, the substance component to it is as important as the music, I think. And I don't think that's discounting the music at all. I just think that that's what rave is, and
people
has
are more
open
to, you know, to like the whole blur concept.
Yeah. And like, you know, like there's like weed at rap concerts or like at a Fish concert or something, but it's just not the same as it is for rave, where it truly is, at least, you know, for me, like the marriage of those two things.
Yes, you're not seeing people break out into fights at a rave.
Yeah. Like, I mean, true rave, like people don't bring guns and
you know, again, some of the most interesting and like experiences I've had at, I don't even know if you would call it rave, but it was special to me, is like when you go to like certain like escape or insomniac parties where, you know, if you drop something, you have 5 people around you who are like pulling out their flashlights, helping you. Like, say what you want about the music, but that gets lost. And it's kind of sad for me because I do miss that with more commercial genres. There's just a better vibe going on with everyone.
Right.
You go to like a trance events at like Exchange now, and you feel more at home, or you feel more welcome than if you were to go to like a techno party where people are just being standoffish and like doing their own thing.
Actually, I need to hit up some Dream State or something and check that out. Well, with that, man, I think we can both agree, Plur, we can always use more Plur. There's never too much. And, you know, since we're coming up on time, you know, I know you have Juliet Sikora tonight. This is Saturday. Today is Saturday. Your episode will air this coming Wednesday. So it will have passed. Yeah. But I guess check out Juliet Sikora anyway. And then is there anything else, you know, you want to plug in the near future that we can get the folks out there?
Check out Under Los Angeles. We have a bunch of really cool parties coming up, Tech House, Prague, everything in between, and hope to see you guys soon. And thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. And then follow you on J.Wu, right?
Jwu.ofc.
Okay, okay.
Fun fact, I thought OFC always stood for of course and not official. I just found out recently.
J.Wu, of course.
Yes.
And, you know, we will obviously have links to all of that stuff on the description for the video. Otherwise, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that like button, smash the bell, and, you know, you can follow me on the gram, although, you know, I don't know how interesting that content is. And otherwise, until next time, thank you.
Thank you, guys.